Gulliver's Travels, Book 2, A Voyage to Brobdingnag, Chapter 1. A great storm described, the longboat sent to fetch water. The author goes with it to discover the country. He is left on shore, is seized by one of the natives, and carried to a farmer's house. His reception there with several accidents that happened to him. A description of the inhabitants. Having been condemned by nature and fortune to an active and restless life, in 2 months after my return, I again left my native country and took shipping in the Downs on the 20th day of June, 1702. In the Adventure, Captain John Nichols as Cornishman, commander bound for Surat. We had a very prosperous gale till we arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, where we landed for fresh water. But, discovering a leak, we unshipped our goods and wintered there. For the captain falling sick of an ague, we could not leave the Cape till the end of March. We then set sail and had a very good voyage till we passed the Straits of Madagascar. But having got northward of that island, and to about 5 degrees south latitude, the winds, which in those seas are observed to blow a constant equal gale between the north and west, from the beginning of December to the beginning of May, on the 19th of April began to blow with much greater violence and more westerly than usual, continuing so for 20 days together, during which time we were driven a little to the east of the Malacca Islands and about 3 degrees northward of the line, as our captain found by an observation he took the 2nd of May, at which time the wind ceased, and it was a perfect calm. Whereat I was not a little rejoiced. But he, being a man well experienced in the navigation of those seas, bid us all prepare against a storm, which accordingly happened on the day following. For a southern wind, called the southern monsoon, began to set in. Finding it was like to overblow, we took in our spritsail and stood by to hand the foresail. But making foul weather, we looked if the guns were all fast and handed the mizzen. The ship lay very broad off, so we thought it better spooning before the sea than trying or hulling. We reefed the foresail and set him, and hauled aft the foresheet. The helm was hard a weather. The ship wore bravely. We belayed the fore downhaul, but the ship was split, and we hauled down the yard and got the sail into the ship and unbound all the things clear of it. It was a very fierce storm. The sea broke strange and dangerous. We hauled off upon the lanyard of the whipstaff and helped the man at helm. We would not get down our topmast, but let it all stand because she scudded before the sea very well, and we knew that the topmast being aloft, the ship was the wholesomer and made better way through the sea, seeing that we had sea room. When the storm was over, we set foresail and mainsail and brought the ship to. Then we set the mizzen, main topsail, and the foretopsail. Our course was east-northeast. The wind was at southwest. We got the starboard tacks aboard. We cast off our weather braces and lifts. We set in the lee braces and hauled forward by the weather bowlings, and hauled them tight and belayed them, and hauled over the mizzen tack to windward, and kept her full and by as near as she would lie. During this storm, which was followed by a strong wind west-southwest, we were carried, by my computation, about 500 leagues to the east, so that the oldest sailor on board could not tell in what part of the world we were. Our provisions held out well, our ship was staunch, and our crew all in good health, but we lay in the utmost distress for water. We thought it best to hold on the same course rather than turn more northerly, which might have brought us to the northwest parts of Great Tartary and into the frozen sea. On the 16th day of June, 1703, a boy on the topmast discovered land. On the 17th, we came in full view of a great island or continent, for we knew not whither. On the south side whereof was a small neck of land jutting out into the sea, and a creek too shallow to hold a ship of above 100 tons. We cast anchor within a league of this creek, and our captain sent a dozen of his men well armed in the longboat, with vessels for water, if any could be found. I desired his leave to go with him, that I might see the country and make what discoveries I could. When we came to land, we saw no river or spring, nor any sign of inhabitants. Our men therefore wandered on the shore to find out some fresh water near the sea, and I walked alone about a mile on the other side, where I observed the country all barren and rocky. I now began to weary, and seeing nothing to entertain my curiosity, I returned gently down toward the creek, and the sea being full in my view, I saw our men already got into the boat and rowing for life to the ship. I was going to holla after them, although it had been to little purpose, when I observed a huge creature walking after them in the sea as fast as he could. He waded not much deeper than his knees and took prodigious strides. But our men had the start of him, half a league, and the sea thereabouts being full of sharp-pointed rocks, the monster was not able to overtake the boat. This I was afterwards told, for I durst not stay to see the issue of that adventure, but ran as fast as I could the way I first went, and then climbed up a steep hill which gave me some prospect of the country. I found it fairly cultivated, but that which first surprised me was the length of the grass, which in those grounds that seemed to be kept for hay was about 20 feet high. I fell into a high road, for so I took it to be, though it served to the inhabitants only as a footpath through a field of barley. Here I walked on for some time, but could see little on either side, it being now near harvest and the corn rising at least 40 feet. I was an hour walking to the end of this field, which was fenced in with a hedge at least 120 feet high, and the trees so lofty that I could make no computation of their altitude. There was a stile to pass from this field into the next. It had 4 steps and a stone to cross over when you came to the uppermost. It was impossible for me to climb this stile, because every step was 6 feet high, and the upper stone above 20. I was endeavoring to find some gap in the hedge when I discovered one of the inhabitants in the next field advancing toward the stile, of the same size with him who I saw in the sea pursuing our boat. He appeared as tall as an ordinary spire steeple, and took about 10 yards at every stride, as near as I could guess. I was struck with the utmost fear and astonishment, and ran to hide myself in the corn, whence I saw him at the top of the stile looking back into the next field on the right hand, and heard him call in a voice many degrees louder than a speaking trumpet. But the noise was so high in the air that at first I certainly thought it was thunder. Whereupon 7 monsters like himself came towards him with reaping hooks in their hands, each hook about the largeness of 6 scythes. These people were not so well clad as the first, whose servants or laborers they seemed to be, for upon some words he spoke, they went to reap the corn in the field where I lay. I kept from them as great a distance as I could, but was forced to move with extreme difficulty, for the stalks of corn were sometimes not above a foot distant, so that I could hardly squeeze my body betwixt them. However, I made a shift to go forward till I came to a part of the field where the corn had been laid by the rain and wind. Here it was impossible for me to advance a step, for the stalks were so interwoven that I could not creep through, and the beards of the fallen ears so strong and pointed that they pierced through my clothes into my flesh. At the same time, I heard the reapers not above 100 yards behind me. Being quite dispirited with toil and wholly overcome by grief and despair, I lay down between 2 ridges, and heartily wished I might there end my days. I bemoaned my desolate widow and fatherless children. I lamented my own folly and wilfulness in attempting a second voyage against the advice of all my friends and relations. In this terrible agitation of mind, I could not forbear thinking of Lilliput, whose inhabitants looked upon me as the greatest progeny that ever appeared in the world, where I was able to draw an imperial fleet in my hand and perform those other actions which will be recorded forever in the chronicles of that empire, while posterity shall hardly believe them, although attested by millions. I reflected what a mortification it must prove to me to appear as inconsiderable in this nation as one single Lilliputian would be among us. But this I conceived was to be the least of my misfortunes. For as human creatures are observed to be more savage and cruel in proportion to their bulk, what could I expect but to be a morsel in the mouth of the first among these enormous barbarians that should happen to seize me? Undoubtedly, philosophers are all in the right when they tell us that nothing is great or little otherwise than by comparison. It might have pleased fortune to let the Lilliputians find some nation where the people were as diminutive with respect to them as they were to me. And who knows but that even this prodigious race of mortals might be equally overmatched in some distant part of the world, whereof we have yet no discovery. Scared and confounded as I was, I could not forbear going on with these reflections when one of the reapers approached within 10 yards of the ridge where I lay, made me apprehend that with the next step I should be squashed to death under his foot or cut in two with his reaping hook. And therefore, when he was again about to move, I screamed as loud as fear could make me. Whereupon the huge creature trod short, and looking around about under him for some time, at last espied me as I lay on the ground. He considered a while, with the caution of one who endeavors to lay hold of a small, dangerous animal in such a manner that it shall not be able either to scratch or to bite him, as I myself have sometimes done with a weasel in England. At length he ventured to take me up behind by the middle between his forefinger and thumb, and brought me within 3 yards of his eyes, that he might behold my shape more perfectly. I guessed his meaning, and my good fortune gave me so much presence of mind that I resolved not to struggle in the least as he held me in the air above 60 feet from the ground, although he grievously pinched my sides for fear I should slip through his fingers. All I ventured was to raise my eyes toward the sun and place my hands together in a supplicating posture, and to speak some words in a humble, melancholy tone, suitable to the condition I then was in. For I apprehended every moment that he would dash me against the ground, as we usually do any little hateful animal which we have a mind to destroy. But my good star would have it that he appeared pleased with my voice and gestures, and began to look upon me as a curiosity, much wondering to hear me pronounce articulate words, although he could not understand them. In the meantime, I was not able to forbear groaning and shedding tears, and turning my head toward my sides, letting him know as well as I could how cruelly I was hurt by the pressure of his thumb and finger. He seemed to apprehend my meaning, for lifting up the lappet of his coat, he put me gently into it, and immediately ran along with me to his master, who was a substantial farmer and the same person I had first seen in the field. The farmer, having, as I supposed by their talk, received such an account of me as his servant could give him, took a piece of small straw, about the size of a walking staff, and therewith lifted up the lappets of my coat, which, it seemed, he thought to be some kind of covering that nature had given me. He blew my hair aside to take a better view of my face. He called his hands about him and asked them, as I afterward learned, whether they had ever seen in the fields any little creatures that resembled me. He then placed me softly on the ground upon all fours, but I got immediately up and walked slowly backward and forward to let those people see I had no intent to run away. They all sat down in a circle about me, the better to observe my motions. I pulled off my hat and made a low bow towards the farmer. I fell to my knees and lifted up my hands and eyes and spoke several words as loud as I could. I took a purse of gold out of my pocket and humbly presented it to him. He received it on the palm of his hand, then applied it close to his eye to see what it was, and afterward turned it several times with the point of a pen, which he took out of his sleeve, but could make nothing of it. Thereupon I made a sign that he should place his hand on the ground. I then took the purse and, opening it, poured all the gold into his palm. There were 6 Spanish pieces of 4 pistoles each, besides 20 or 30 smaller coins. I saw him wet the tip of his little finger upon his tongue and take up one of the largest pieces and then another, but he seemed to be wholly ignorant what they were. He made me a sign to put them again into my purse and the purse again into my pocket, which after offering it to him several times, I thought it best to do. The farmer by this time was convinced I must be a rational creature. He spoke often to me, but the sound of his voice pierced my ears like that of a watermill, yet his words were articulate enough. I answered as loud as I could in several languages, and he often laid his ear within 2 yards of me, but all in vain, for we were wholly unintelligible to each other. He then sent his servants to their work, and taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, he doubled and spread it on his left hand, which he placed flat on the ground with the palm upwards, making me a sign to step into it, as I could easily do, for it was not above a foot in thickness. I thought it my part to obey, and for fear of falling, laid myself at full length upon the handkerchief, with the remainder of which he lapped me up to the head for further security, and in this manner carried me home to his house. There he called his wife and showed me to her, but she screamed and ran back, as women in England do at the sight of a toad or a spider. However, when she had a while seen my behavior, and how well I observed the signs her husband made, she was soon reconciled, and by degrees grew extremely tender of me. It was about 12 at noon, and a servant brought in dinner. It was only one substantial dish of meat, fit for the plain condition of a husbandman, in a dish of about 24 feet diameter. The company were the farmer and his wife, 3 children, and an old grandmother. And we're going to pause here, and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.